Perhaps a good start to the conversation now, Prof, would be to give us a brief history of the relationship between the University of Namibia and, of course, the University of South Africa, commonly known as UNISA. Talk to us a bit about how that relationship started off and how it has evolved over the years.
I want to really be appreciative of the Vice Chancellor of the University of Namibia, Professor Matengu, who's also the chairperson of the Pan-African University, the African Union University, which coordinates African science university systems and tries to ensure that as universities we relate with one another. And through his work, we were able to connect with him as the University of South Africa and to look at the opportunities that we could harness, propel, project for the service and benefit of our countries, Namibia and South Africa. And precisely because University of South Africa is the first university in the world to create open distance education. No. And University of Namibia is a prestigious university in Namibia with multiple disciplines and knowledge areas. We felt it was important. We have at UNISA 400,000 students. So scale is one of the areas that we find important. Some of the leaders of Namibia actually have graduated from the University of South Africa. Yeah. And UNAM seems to also have created large cohorts of leaders of different sectors in our economy, in Namibia, but also elsewhere in the world, including your neighboring countries. So that is a connecting point, I think, for our relationship.
Prof, why do you think is it so important for universities to collaborate in various areas, especially now in this ever-changing world where we are, becoming a very digitalized environment, where people are talking about artificial intelligence? Why is it important for, African universities in particular to join forces and put their heads together instead of working in silos? Why is it so important to foster these relationships in this moment in time?
The universities in Africa actually have the moral obligation or ethical obligation to collaborate. If we look at the grand questions of our times, whether we think about poverty, inequality, climatic changes, ecological degradation, gender justice or injustices, the wars that are taking place now, it is imperative that the knowledge arena and the developments that universities resource, that we should be at the center of resourcing African states to making constructive decisions that benefit our societies. And to do so, you need science, you need analytics, you need policy systems that enable better decision systems. And I think it's very important for us, even in this collaboration, to remind our governments that they have to invest in universities because we cannot, in post-apartheid, post-colonial periods, constantly be looking towards the global north or to the east for solutions that are required here. They must be contextually grounded. They must understand the philosophies and worldviews of our societies. They must also try to ensure that our communities and our people get the knowledge that allow them to be competitive anywhere in the world. So the local and global interface is quite important. And therefore, we need to collaborate to ensure that Africa's knowledge is not just what they claim to be 10%. It should be more than that. And we should never go with a begging bowl to anybody, but ensure that they are valid, they are recognized, and they allow economic transformation for our societies.
And as a matter of fact, we do see African scholars teaching at leading schools, Ivy League universities in the States or in England. There we find African scholars at Oxford, and one asks the question, but how do we lose so much talent? How do we let talent leave the continent to go and empower other economies? How do we address perhaps maybe the issue of that brain drain?
I often caution, even in my university or in my society, when we question the diaspora intellectuals. I think as part of Africanization and ensuring that our philosophies find expression in the global arena. It is important to have the best intellectuals serving the world. But perhaps for us as local universities in the continent, how we connect with them, how we give them visiting professorships so that we can compare, contrast the beneficial value of the geographic location in the global north. So I think it's about us, the vice chancellors in the continent, how we optimize the benefits of such and not allow it to be a brain drain, but to be an investment that allows us to have the full horizon of the global arena. And therefore, we need now to have joined qualifications. We need to have diaspora Africa intellectuals coming to reteach, to research, to collaborate in research with African scholars, because it is through their varied experiences that they will also enable those of us who are located within the continent to be aware, alert of the decision systems or policy changes or areas that we need to focus on in our research and science, in how we form students. But two, you've raised an important aspect about digitization. There's this idea that has been planted that Africa or Africans don't need university systems, that we must just invest in basic education. I want to reaffirm to colleagues that it is a fault line that we must contest, because we need universities. It is through universities that we form people who will produce products, processes, intellectual property, educated citizens that can take constructive decisions, and therefore governments must invest in universities, must not listen to the logics that some of the international financial institutions are saying it is not good for Africa to invest in. Two, the digitization systems. If you look at digital platforms, many of them are not our digital platforms. So our universities, UNAM and UNISA, are looking into investing in creating digital systems that work, that are attentive to the evolution of artificial intelligence, machine learning, radio frequency identifications, so that we are also not dependent on the East or on the West on the platforms. Your devices, I'm sure they come from somewhere through the Atlantic. They come from somewhere through the Indian Ocean for us and the Atlantic. And we must, as leaders of universities, ensure that we create capabilities for ourselves not to be dependent.
So in other words, finding African solutions to African problems.
Definitely. We don't talk, for instance, the Kenyan young people who created the digital fintech systems. How do we rally around such inventive spirit, which is an African inventive area, and ensure that it optimizes the value for Africa? In future, we will be 2 billion. Why do we look to the East? Why not optimize Africa's resources? And with the youthful dividend, it is my suggestion and proposition that we as African universities must collaborate, must spawn enterprises that are transnational and allow our countries to be competitive. We should be like you in Namibia. You're exporting beef everywhere in the world. It must generate a beneficial impact for the people of Namibia who are in that sector. The same is true for South Africa. We are, as UNISA, we've set up and assisted many countries to set up open distance education institutions, because we think UNISA must not be the only site of excellence in scaling higher education, but it must collaborate with other countries in the continent, because Open University in the UK was modeled on UNISA.
Wow.
And people think, oh no, we have to go and benchmark with Open University in the UK or Free University or Indira Gandhi University, when the actual fountain for that knowledge base is in the continent. So at UNAM, there are critical things that may not be known, but that we as UNISA found quite important to learn from UNAM. One, the medical sciences. The best quality medical teaching environment, veterinary sciences. This is one area that our university, we don't have veterinary sciences, and we're interested in learning from UNAM. And I think this is where we empower, re-empower, and collaborate together to empower our societies through knowledge, and I'm excited about the partnership.
Awesome. Talking about the partnership, one of the areas that, the academic areas of mutual interest is the advancement of agricultural ecosystems. Now, as you would know, Windhoek was playing host to this huge event that took place where the finest minds coming to Namibia to discuss how we can turn African agriculture into wealth. And we had a conversation around that. One of my guests was Professor Mungai from Kenya. Yes. And one of the questions that I posed was, why is the question of food security, and development of agriculture more important now than ever? And how do we change the narrative of Africa being considered, on one hand, it's almost an oxymoron, minerally rich country, but at the same time, a poor country, hands stretched out to the east and west, begging while we have the most fertile soil, while we're sitting with the resources that fuel all these economies around the world?
It is a known fact that I, as an academic and a professor of ethics, one of the areas I have not been happy with and have publicly expressed, even if it may be career limiting, is that this idea of African presidents going to see one president, whether it's of a country in the East or a country in Europe, must stop. Because we are a rich continent. Intellectually, if you look at the first university in the world, whether you think about Timbuktu or you think about the Al Qurain in Morocco, Fez, one of the universities that was started by a woman, whether you think about the models of the archival systems that would have been created here at Mapungube, close to us, or the Zimbabwean ruins, we must remember to ensure that we decolonize our minds and remember that some of the inventive areas that are now benefiting the world were initiatives or inventions of Africa. So African political elite, African economic elite, African academicians must first reignite themselves to understanding that they should not go with a begging bowl into the West or in the global North or the East. It's very important. That logic is quite important because I think that is what has made us to be the begging bowl. We are the best in biotic material. No continent has the diversities of biotic material, flora, fauna, trees, shrubs, plants, food, and we should protect that. That's why I'm very appreciative that Roof Forum has brought us here to think about agriculture. Beyond being biotic rich, we are mineral resources rich. Singapore doesn't have minerals, but is one of the leading countries. Why? Because they changed the logic and looked and optimized on their assets. So I think we need to optimize our assets. Agriculture has multiple value chains and processes that are entwined, whether the water sector, the food security and food sovereignty sector, the ownership of seeds in terms of conserving our seeds and ensuring that we protect ourselves. If you think about it, we were supposed to have all died during COVID-19 as Africans. Yet the largest mortality was in Europe and elsewhere. It is our indigenous food systems that saved us. And we've not studied what it was in our food systems. Why do now large pharmaceutical companies want to colonize our seed systems and our food systems? So it's very important for us to be a learning society, even from traumatic experiences such as the COVID-19. And therefore, this meeting is quite important. How do we scale agriculture? How do we protect indigenous knowledge systems that have allowed us to live meaningfully and for our health and well-being to be protected, even in COVID systems where global North countries were not willing to give us vaccines. So I think it is really to have an interest of humanizing our communities, our countries, but also even the world, the global arena. So agriculture is one of those areas that youth and young adults must not be. It must be the cool area, because if you're a geneticist, it gives you an opportunity. If you just want to sell cheese, you have an opportunity. If you're in fashion, the leather from the cows and from the wool from the goats, so it has multifaceted impact. And I think it's quite good that University of Namibia invited the universities here to collaborate and to bid to host through forum, because we are 179 vice chancellors have congregated in Namibia to rethink the strategies for agriculture into the future. There are also multiple science council CEOs. There are excellent scholars who are known in these areas, including our friends and partners from the diverse countries outside Africa. But it is our business. It must be our commitment as African intellectuals to ensure that we determine the trajectories, not be told how to do them.
Lastly, I would like to address the elephant in the room, which is the lack of funding for research. Now, research is key for universities, but unfortunately, we have seen the lack of funding coming from government, and scholars or researchers now have to fend for funds across the borders, which begs the question. There's a saying that, the one who pays the piper calls the tune. At what expense is this donor funding coming, and living in a world where data is being described as the new gold? When we do this research as African scholars, what happens to all that data? What happens to all that information? Seeing that you're not the one funding it, who owns that wealth of knowledge? And what are we losing out as a continent by not investing in research?
I must commend the government of Namibia and government of South Africa, because they've created funding or grant-making institutions. So in South Africa, we have the National Research Foundation, and I understand 8 years ago, Namibia set up NCRC. And I think this is a great opportunity for the discussion that we're having. The second aspect is that although these institutions, at least, are supported in Namibia and in South Africa, the other countries in the continent do not have funding systems that are directed where the government invests in. So this is a discourse. Do academics pay attention to the budgeting systems, national budget system, and influence and advocate for research, inventions, and higher education to be supported? It is our obligation as university to start influencing policy changes like those, and to ensure that politicians understand the beneficial value of funding higher education, on investing in research, on ensuring that African intellectuals, scholars, researchers are not dependent on funding from external partners, but the basic funding is provided. It allows us also to keep our data sets, because data is currency in a digital system. That's what creates money. That's what enables decisions that are constructive. That's what enables economic transformations, and that's what enables the refunding of higher education and the expansive footprint of the impact that universities can make in society. I find it faulty that our governments will get somebody who doesn't even know how tea looks like to come and advise them, because they've been encouraged by the World Bank or International Monetary Fund or some funding agency. I think we have to develop constructive partnerships with the World Bank, with the UNICEF and others to say, where are the experts in Africa that can be directing the decision systems, and partner with them and ensure that these particular large multinational, multilateral institutions or even multi-funding institutions are able to understand the leadership and the role of African intellectuals. They cannot respect us if our own governments do not pay attention and are disinterested in our universities. And I'm very appreciative that for our countries, this is not the case. However, we should be having stronger budgets that enable us to strengthening research beyond basic research.
Absolutely.